Hello everyone and welcome to the National Army Museum for this week's Friday Insight. Here at the museum we tell the story of the British Army and the people who served in it, from the civil wars to the present day through our galleries, collections, programmes and research. There are many ways you can support the museum. You can buy a book in our shop, visit the cafe, donate or become a member where you can get exclusive discounts and your very own events programme. Today I'm delighted to welcome Tony Rushmer. Tony has been a journalist for almost 30 years, covering a wide range of top-class sport for print and broadcast media. His first book was the critically acclaimed The Triumph of Henry Cecil, which is one of the 3 finalists for the 2019 Dr. Tony Ryan Award. Today, he'll be sharing the story of SAS original Reg Seekings and his journey to become one of the most highly decorated Special Forces soldiers of the Second World War. So there will be time for questions at the end of the discussion for our in-person audience and online. For our online audience, you can post the questions in the Q&A chat bar, and these will be put to Tony at the end of his talk. Moving on with some technical points, should we encounter any technical issues, please bear with us while we try to rectify them. If your stream freezes, we suggest that you click the refresh button at the top of your browser. Usually that cures all ills. A member of our team will be active in the chat bar to assist you should you have any queries or issues. With that now said, I now pass you over to Tony.
Amy, thank you. Thank you. So until 4 or 5 years ago, my knowledge of the Special Air Service history was extremely limited. In many ways, it still is. But in 2020, I stumbled on someone so remarkable, I was captivated in a way I could never have imagined. That someone was Reg Seekings, an SAS original and a man to this day considered by the regiment to be among its greats. Now, I'm sure many of you will have read or heard about him, and if so, you'll already know about his gallantry, ferociousness in combat, and all-round granite hardness. However, during this talk, I'll aim to shine a light on aspects of his personality that perhaps haven't been so well documented, if at all. During my research for SAS Duty Before Glory, I discovered the sheer depth of Reg Seekings' character. Yes, he was that extremely tough individual of reputation, someone prepared to do brutal things, as one author noted. But it's remiss to view him through that prism alone. And I'll tell you why. Alongside the bravery and the brawn, Seekings was wily. He was decisive. He was incredibly committed. He was deeply loyal to the men around him. He had a sense of humour. He could be compassionate. And he was much more besides. Reg Seekings was a leader of men. How did I reach those conclusions? Well, for starters, I listened to hour after hour of the audio reels that Reg recorded in later life. His sure, solid assertions imprinted themselves on my mind. And I read a series of Reg's notebooks. Given access to these by a private collector, they were gold dust. Handwritten by Seekings in the decade following the war, they offered fresh insights into the early years of the SAS and the man himself. Those resources, along with interviews that I carried out, revealed the man's many layers. And it's this fully rounded figure that I will be aiming to share with you in the next half an hour or so. So how did Seekings' story become so important to me? Well, I first came across him while at home in the Cambridgeshire Fens during one of the lockdowns. Flicking through the TV channels, I landed on a BBC documentary. It soon became clear the programme was about the origins of the Special Air Service. I should explain here that I'm a sports journalist. My last book was about the champion racehorse trainer, Sir Henry Cecil. Indeed, until I channel hopped onto that BBC documentary, I'd shown little or no interest in the details of World War II. But that programme about these men, the first men of the SAS, had me hooked in moments. And there's Reg, third along there in the middle of those 5 men on the truck. This programme was brilliant. The narrative included use of archive interview clips with some of the key individuals that were there at the SAS's inception. Each man had a fascinating tale to tell, but I found Reg's memories especially vivid and compelling. For some reason, he just stuck out to me. Maybe it was the hint of a rural accent that made me wonder if his background was similar to my own. Anyhow, I was sufficiently intrigued to Google him and found Seekings hailed from just outside Ely, not more than a couple of miles from the sofa I was sat on. You could have knocked me down with a feather. The proximity of our respective homes, albeit with a time delay of many decades, had my attention in a big way. I began to read up everything I could about Seekings and the wartime SAS. The Fenland connection meant Reg's war always appealed to me most, and he seemed to pop up just about everywhere, as the SAS made an incredible impact in North Africa and then Europe. But it was the unveiling of a sign in the spring of 2021 that got me writing about this man. A newly constructed bypass bridge on the outskirts of Ely was given his name. Its title was Seekings Way, and I knew then that I wanted to write his story. In the early days of the project, I had the good fortune to correspond with an ex-para called Gil Boyd. Gil put me in touch with the Seekings family and the SAS Regimental Association. One introduction led to another, and I was lucky enough to speak with this man, SAS legend Mike Sadler. Over a couple of years, it really was my immense privilege to spend quite a lot of time with Mike. Now, some of this centurion's faculties had diminished, but not so his sharp and humorous mind. His memory was quite incredible when it came to recalling some of those wartime operations. Those conversations really fueled me. So alongside the hours, days and weeks of research, I wrote and I wrote, 0 to 90,000 words in just over 2 years. That's the book's background. Let me tell you a little bit more about Reg's. He was born in 1920, surrounded by farm fields. He was educated in the village of Stuntney, half a mile or so to the east of Ely. A school leaver at the age of 14, he somewhat reluctantly followed in his father's footsteps and began working on the fields as a farm labourer. Bleak, desolate, and bitterly cold in the winter months, exposed with nowhere to hide from the baking sun in summer. This then was the environment that shaped and hardened all the young men who grafted long days, long weeks, long years in the fens. Reg's dad, Albert. He was originally a professional soldier in the Bedfordshire Regiment and suffered serious injury in the Great War. Albert sustained severe shrapnel wounds in the Third Battle of Ypres, lying alone for 3 days in no man's land. The legacy of Albert's war was a hole in his back so big you could put your fist in it. Reg's mum, here she is, Annie. She was as loud and boisterous as her husband was quiet and understated. Annie loved to win. Even more, she hated to lose. One Christmas, the family Ludo board ended up in the fire after a game turned against her. You get the picture. So Albert and Annie were two very strong characters, but in distinctly different ways. And they can't fail to have influenced their 3 children. Young Reg. He was also someone with ideas of his own. Certainly he wanted more than a lifetime working on the fields. Indeed, by the late 1930s, he had visions of making his name and quite possibly his fortune as a boxer. A powerful, brave fighter, he was pretty good, if not quite textbook. How do we know this? Well, news of his bouts often made the local papers. I came across one report in the Wisbech Standard that referred to him as Seekings the Mixer, and it noted Reg's heavy wallops. He wasn't always successful, but he did enjoy a notable highlight in February 1939. By then a territorial soldier, he won an infantry divisional title as a light heavyweight in Bury St Edmunds, Suffolk. Later that year, his plans to progress in the boxing ring had to be shelved. Britain had declared war on Hitler's Germany, and the path of so many young men's lives changed. Seekings and younger brother Bob began the war with their home county army, the Cambridgeshire Regiment. The boys spent the opening months of the conflict in North Norfolk. A snowy winter. It was all rather slow for Reg. He craved a bit of action. Ambitious, determined, he was always willing to take a risk if it would help him get where he wanted. And that's how he got himself out of Norfolk. Late spring 1940, he was acting company runner when an adjutant informed him that returns for special service duties had not been lodged. Now, Reg had been volunteering for exactly these type of duties without getting released for them. He senses a chance here to do something about the situation. So what does he do? He sneaks into a deserted company office, a North Norfolk barn, tracks down the appropriate paperwork, writes his name down onto the list, and duly delivers the document into the hands of the adjutant. Admin deception or quick-witted opportunism, I'll let you decide. Either way, Reg's actions did the trick. Within weeks, he was off to the newly formed 7 Commando, soon to be joined by sibling Bob. Also switching from the Cambridgeshire's to 7 Commando was the brothers' good pal and fellow fenman Eric Musk. And so began a journey that would take the trio to North Africa and beyond. And here they are. Bob Seekings on the right-hand end as we look. Talented sportsman and runner. In that photo, he's not much more than 17 years old. They've all got a fag on, we see. Eric Musk sat in the centre. He was a well-known local footballer, always getting written up in the local papers for fine play. And he was also known for his bone-crushing handshakes. But Eric was very much a gentleman, and actually a gentleman. This image was taken in North Africa in the spring of 1941. Early that year, the men had sailed for the Western Desert as part of a commando formation that became known as Lay Force. Commanding officer, Colonel Bob Laycock. Now, the Western Desert, here we are, was, of course, a major theatre, seen to ebb and flow fighting between vast rival armies over more than 2.5 years. Cairo was the Allies' stronghold, and to its east lay the Suez Canal. Now, this was the strategically vital waterway to the Middle East oil fields and beyond. For Britain's Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, Egypt had to be held at all costs. But in those first months of 1941, it was the Axis forces, Germany and Italy, that were on the front foot, marshalled by the famous German general, Erwin Rommel. Now, of the Fen trio, it was actually Bob Seekings and Eric Musk that were the first to engage in hand-to-hand combat. The pair were involved in the Allies' fighting withdrawal from Crete, but were left behind in the official evacuation. Undeterred, they were among a party that escaped via a landing craft that soon ran out of fuel. But after 10 increasingly desperate days at sea, the men finally ended up behind home lines in Egypt. Now, Reg missed out on Crete, having been hospitalised with an infected thigh. Indeed, his war had lapsed into frustration and disappointment. But in midsummer 1941, everything changed when he attended a recruitment event for a new unit. Its commanding officer was David Stirling. In quiet, purposeful tones, Stirling explained he intended to set up a dynamic, highly trained and mobile force that would take the fight to the Axis powers extended across North Africa. Stirling, recently promoted to captain, planned to insert small patrols deep behind the lines to carry out highly dangerous sabotage missions. Air bases, transport parks and supply lines were the key targets. Reg was impressed by the tall Scotsman. Subsequently, the young private underwent a short interview with Stirling and outlined his boxing credentials. He also spoke of a long-held ambition to become a parachutist. The upshot was he found himself selected for L Detachment of the freshly minted Special Air Service. It proved to be an exceptional fit for both man and unit. With the SAS, Reg discovered a place that felt like home. The men around him soon became more like mates than anything else. Training proved tough and occasionally violent, but there was learning and there was laughter. For Seekings, it was a heady mix, also addictive. By the final month of 1941, the Special Air Service had registered its first success. Not only was Reg there, but he played a key part in the action, hundreds of miles behind the front lines. Here's what happened. Okay, so back to the map. The Allied 8th Army is preparing to attack the Gazala line. So I'll just show you the Gazala line here, if I can get this to work. So the Gazala line was here. At that point, the SAS had flown to a forward operating base here, Jalo Oasis. The plan was to attack here, Sirte and Tamet. So you can see how far that was behind the lines. So they'd flown in early December to this forward operating base. Fresh in the memory is their disastrous first attempt to strike at enemy airfields close to the Libyan coastline. This had been almost a month earlier when high winds caused chaos in a nighttime parachute infiltration. And it got worse. Once on the ground, a biblical storm unleashed, turning Operation Squatter into an abject failure. Of the 55 men that jumped into the darkness, only 21 return. Some of those that don't make it back are captured, others injured, and a handful die. Just about the only positive to come out of Operation Squatter was that the exfiltration process triggered a light bulb moment. As arranged, the party, albeit badly depleted, was brought back in trucks by the long-range desert group. And so the rationale followed. If the LRDG could return the SAS to home lines, then surely these self-same masters of the sands could go Sterling's raiders deep into enemy territory, which is exactly what happened in the days leading up to December 14, 1941. Almost a week earlier, the trucks left Jalo. Around 350 miles of challenging desert terrain lay ahead. Once negotiated, it was left to Mike Sadler to navigate a small party through the closing miles to within striking distance of Tamet Aerodrome. Then came the final leg of the infiltration. This was led by an Ireland and British Lions rugby star, Paddy Mayne. Picture the scene. A pitch-black airfield about to be assaulted by Mayne's 6-strong patrol. Prime targets, and somewhere out there, are Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters and Stuka dive bombers. It's Seekings who's first to whiff the scent of octane on the evening air. He also spots a runway post, another positive sign. But before the patrol can find the planes, Italian voices are heard nearby. In response, Mayne orders Reg and Chalky White, himself a pre-war West Brom footballer, to stalk a small hut. Then Mayne and the 3 others set off in the direction of the larger building. In due course, Mayne approaches it, kicks open the doors, and strides into what appears to be a mess room. Its occupants are stunned, caught completely unawares. "Good evening," says Mayne. The realization of what's actually happening starts to dawn on one of the enemy airmen. He begins to back away. That's the cue for pandemonium. Mayne's party proceeds to shoot up the place thoroughly and then vanishes into the darkness. So where's Reg? Well, he and Chalky White are having their own excitement. As they creep toward the smaller hut, static lines of tracer fire begin to whiz toward them. The pair are forced to jump and crawl to avoid being cut down. They manage to scramble away and link up again with Paddy's men. Once reassembled, the patrol retraces its steps. Bingo. They locate an airfield full of fighter planes and dive bombers. Mayne, adrenaline coursing, jumps onto an Italian CR-42 biplane. The stuff of SAS legend is about to take place. Here's what Seekings would later write about those moments. "I thought Paddy had gone mad as he dived in the cockpit. He ripped the dashboard clean out. How he'd done it, I shall never know. I don't think any of us had ever been so excited before. our first aircraft. And I'm afraid none of us acted the true Englishman. After that, the whole patrol caused chaos. They roamed around Tamet airfield, attaching Lewis bombs. These were the incendiary explosives designed a couple of months earlier by their very own Jock Lewis, another legendary SAS figure. That night, Seekings and Main were the last pair to leave Tamet airfield. Indeed, it was Reg to deliver the final word. Trying, but not quite managing to do a paddy and rip out a dashboard, he improvised and used his revolver butt to smash up the controls of a Stuka bomber. On their way back to the LRDG trucks, he and Main paused for a fag break. Glancing behind them, they saw a sight progressively exploding into a mass of flames. Petrol and bomb dumps, as well as aircraft, were blowing up all over the place. Minimum demands on manpower and equipment had delivered a seismic result. 24 enemy planes were taken out of action. Main's party had well and truly proved the efficacy of Sterling's blueprint idea. And the raid would mark the template for a string of similar deep penetration assaults that were to play havoc not only with the enemy's supply lines, but also their mines. No longer could the Axis rear rest easy at night. Okay, Tamet is a clear example of Seeking's goal-oriented drive. The raid showed his burning desire to get the job done, and done well. His fearlessness and bravado were also clear to see. And over the following months, Reggie's reputation grew further as his skill set became ever more apparent. Indeed, the high regard in which he was increasingly held was underlined in early 1943 when Generals Harding and Freiberg consulted him in person. Seekings had just come back from a dangerous and extended operation in Tripolitania. He'd been in command of a small patrol that had repeatedly hit enemy transport park-ups and lines of communication along a stretch of the Libyan coastal highway. On his return, Generals Harding and Freiberg wanted to pick his brains on the accuracy of the Allies' maps and troop positions. So one evening, Reg sat down in esteemed company to offer a string of insights. He later recorded the conference in one of those notebooks. It was very interesting and thrilling for a young sergeant to sit with two of the most successful generals in the British Army and help plan full-scale attacks on Tripoli and Misurata. And by then, Seekings had been awarded a Distinguished Conduct Medal, gallantry decoration ranked only beneath the VC. The citation reads, "This NCO has taken part in 10 raids. He has himself destroyed over 15 aircraft, and by virtue of his accuracy with a Tommy gun at night, and through a complete disregard for his personal safety, killed at least 10 of the enemy." Brave, decisive, committed. And with each passing month, further qualities became evident. One of those that I aim to fully show in the book is Reg's underlying humanity. Now, for me, this became absolutely apparent amid traumatic circumstances that unfolded in the East Italian port of Termoli on the afternoon of Tuesday, October the 5th, 1943. For context, the SAS had been repurposed as the Special Raiding Squadron. The unit was now commanded by Paddy Main, David Sterling having been captured by the enemy in the last months of the Desert War. Main's squadron also included Bob Seekings and Eric Musk, freshly qualified operatives for the unit. The pair were among Main's men involved in amphibious assaults in Sicily, most notably on the sharp end at Capo Muro di Porco for Operation Husky. That was the commando-style spearhead action that saw the Special Raiding Squadron silence the enemy's heavy guns and pave the way for the Allies' invasion fleet. Once the Allies' Sicily objectives were fulfilled, the squadron also went into Italy, first stop Bagnara. Arriving by boat, they outflank an enemy stronghold before linking up with the advancing main army. Mission accomplished. A similar plan was made for Termoli. But this time, the main army took time to arrive en masse. As a result, Main's force was used in an unaccustomed defensive capacity as the Germans launched a full-scale counterattack. Bob and Eric were among the thin line of resistance, gallantly facing up to a sustained onslaught from elements of the 16th Panzer Division. Meanwhile, in Termoli's centre, Reg is by the tailgate of a truck containing Lieutenant Johnny Wiseman's section. It's mid-afternoon, and the men are about to depart to bolster the diminishing numbers defending Termoli. Before I go on, I should just mention here that there are details in this story that some people might find upsetting. So Termoli, by the side of the Adriatic Sea, finds itself under sustained and heavy artillery fire. Reg is at the back of a truck. Now, for one reason and another, the vehicle's departure becomes delayed. Just before 3 o'clock, a shell lands smack in the middle of it. The damage was immediate and immense. Here's the truck amid a scene of destruction on that side street. Reg is blown clean away from the back of the vehicle. Somehow he escapes with only a damaged finger. All around him, devastation, confusion. Covered in bits of flesh, he's among the first, if not the first, to respond. Soon he stumbles across a pal on fire. The man's already dead, but Seekings' instincts tell him to find water to put out the flames. He also encounters a couple of his mates, just about alive, but with their chests blown wide open, heart and lungs visible. One of the soldiers' faces is pulped so severely that Reg can only recognise him by voice. As these men cling to the last minute of their lives, Seekings tries to make them as comfortable as he can. It's the very worst of scenes. And yet Reg is doing what he can for men who, after a long campaign, had become more than just comrades. They were his friends. In the hours that follow, Allied reinforcements flood into Termoli. The battle is won. Seekings returns to the street, this street. He returns to search for dismembered limbs. Immediately after the blast, he had seen them on telephone wires, on roofs. He is determined to give those dead men the dignity they deserve. In matter-of-fact prose, just on your screen here, Eric Musk later recorded Reg's actions, and he wrote this: Sergeant Seekings collected all the limbs, all the arms, legs, heads, etc., and made sure they were all belonging to the right person. We then buried them. There were also civilian casualties. One was a young Italian boy. The shell strike had left him screaming in agony with his guts blown out. Seekings shot him out of mercy. He said, "There was absolutely no hope for the boy. You couldn't let anybody suffer like that." Now, the following year, Seekings, who'd been pretty lucky up to this point, to put it mildly, was shot himself. Shortly after D-Day, he parachuted into the Morvan region in central France for Operation Houndsworth. SAS's A Squadron's mission was to engage in a series of sabotage and ambush activities. The aim to prevent enemy reinforcements flooding up from the south of France and reinforcing the Normandy beachheads. It wasn't part of the brief to become embroiled in any pitched battles. However, one such encounter unfolded in late June in a valley in Vermont. It was there that Seekings took a bullet at the base of his skull. In a rare misjudgment, he emerges from cover and finds himself staring down the barrel of his patrol's target, a gunner protecting enemy transport. Now, there's no time to react. The enemy fires, and a bullet lodges in the cavity between Seekings' spine and skull. He sinks to the ground, registering no pain. A period of time elapses. Seekings has no idea how long. Eventually, clarity of thought returns. Reg summons all that inner strength, and with blood oozing from the bullet wound, makes a run for it, 50 yards or so. He reaches the cover of a fallen tree, and it's there he realises he's dropped his pipe during the dash. Now, given that he's got a bullet in the back of his head, you'd think the pipe was pretty inconsequential, but no. Bizarrely, Reg decides to run back and try and find it, which he does. That's just about all his energy spent, though. He's helped back to camp and knows very little about much of the next week. But he pulls through, and remarkably quickly given what's just happened. And his recovery period is overseen by SAS Padre Fraser McCluskey. And I just want to dwell on Reg and the Padre for a few moments. Padre McCluskey. So I found the progression of Reg's responses fascinating when it came to McCluskey. For me, those responses show a growing maturity, a wider acceptance of others. And remember, Reg is only about 23 that summer in France. Initially, he had a dim view of McCluskey. Parsons didn't interest me, he said. That opinion gradually changed in France, and not just because the Padre closely tended to him in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. Through that summer of 1944, the unarmed McCluskey demonstrated a rare lightness of touch. He constantly looked out, not just for Reg, but all the men of A Squadron. Seekings, in fact, grew to enjoy the Padre's company. The pair spent many an hour in conversation together, and so began a long-standing friendship. In fact, years later, Reg acknowledged that McCluskey offered something rather wonderful to those on Operation Houndsworth. The Scot, for his part, reciprocated by writing that Seekings could be as smart as he was tough and good-hearted. Picking up on a couple of McCluskey's words, good-hearted. To those that he grew close to, Reg was the best of company. Indeed, David Sterling once noted how Seekings and best pal Johnny Cooper had the ability to laugh easily, regardless of circumstance. Now, not everyone saw Seekings in the same way as McCluskey and Sterling did. Indeed, one fellow SAS original labelled Reg dour and unintelligent. But here's a final anecdote that shows the opposite to be the case. It's early spring, 1945. Reg is deep into Hitler's Germany as part of a combined SAS and field security party intent on flushing out suspected Nazi war criminals. They're trying to locate one individual through his mistress, and she's proving incredibly stubborn. Seekings puts on his thinking cap, and he comes up with quite the flash of inspiration. Now, like a lot of soldiers, Reg is into amateur photography. Here he is, pictured with a camera in Germany in 1945. And in one German city, he's found a chemist to develop his snaps. The same guy gives Reg an idea on how to break the silence of the German officer's tight-lipped mistress. He asks the chemist, is it possible to doctor images? For example, could he fake up a photo so that a good-looking girl was shown sat on the lap of the man they were pursuing? The chemist confirms yes, he could, and gets to work. Then, armed with the requested fake picture, Seekings duly presents the damning evidence to the mistress. You mean to tell me you don't know this man? The woman instantly erupts, and in her rage lets slip the whereabouts of her apparent cheat of a lover. Case closed. How was that for a piece of blue skies thinking from Seekings? Early Photoshop modifications helped track down wanted Nazi. Dull, unimaginative? Hardly. Reg was resourceful and he was cunning. To sum up, Seekings' service with the SAS was just relentless, and he saw more action than most. He was even in Belsen with an SAS jeep patrol to the fore on the day that the infamous concentration camp was liberated. Extraordinary stories surrounding events such as that and a lot more are contained in my book. Suffice to say, Reg, brother Bob, and friend Eric Musk all made it back to the Fens. Reg, in his own words, admitted to being a bit amazed to have got through it all. He had become one of the most highly decorated Special Forces soldiers of the war, rising from a lowly private status to Squadron Sergeant Major in an innovative, dynamic, and very successful new force, the SAS. And he had done it all in his own unique style. He had done it Seekings' way. Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind.